Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you are doing well. Good to see you. Welcome to Lewisville. My name's Matt. If we've never met, glad to have you here. We are wrapping up a series we've been doing over the last number of weeks all around money, called The Other Side of the Coin, looking at giving, generosity, greed, stewardship, all these kinds of ideas. And it's been really good. I have really enjoyed some of the conversations that have come out as we've been exploring different themes and topics, different sections of Scripture, around how it relates, how money relates to our discipleship, seeing it not just as this abstract, distant thing, but a key part of what it means for us as followers of Jesus here now to pay attention. And so we'll be wrapping everything up today and including a number of different elements. I'm going to share a little bit, another passage that ties into some of the key themes we've been exploring, but also have a chance for us to hear from some members of our community, because as much as I try to put flesh on the ideas, it's always a good idea to have some people who are willing to get up to share a little bit about their own discipleship journey when it comes to finances and money and stewardship and things like that. So in just a few minutes, we'll have some of our own friends up here to share, which is no small thing on this kind of a topic. So I'm in advance thanking these folks for their willingness to participate. If you remember, last week we talked about tithing. We talked about the foundation in the Old Testament, how it got started, its roots. We talked about the idea of moving from that principle prescribed in the law into this posture of radical generosity. What does that look like? How can a tithe principle still be applicable for us today? We've had all kinds of great conversations. And lots of people sending different stuff my way, different texts or comments here and there, or in passing as I've bumped into people even around the city over the last number of weeks. This one in particular seemed to get some real interest from folks. I heard from a number of different people. They all sent me actually the exact same post. So I'm going to show you the post, but before I do, it has to do with tithing. Now we recognize every church handles conversations around discipleship and stewardship and tithing and generosity differently. Lewisville, we very much have our own kind of vibe and ethos, and I can't help it. Part of the way we talk about it comes through me, so my own personality obviously comes into this conversation. But what I discovered I think 4 different people sent this to me, which was interesting that they all sent me the exact same thing. It made me realize, wow, some churches have a real different approach to what they talk about, especially in terms of giving and tithing. And so let me just show you this. This is what one church decided to do. Will a man rob God? Malachi 3:8, which is part of that verse, 3:8. And then they have the non-tithers board. And I'm pretty glad we can't zoom in. I don't know who those names are. I don't even know where this church is located. But can you imagine? It's an interesting approach. Makes me wonder what some of their other approaches are in terms of church life together. But obviously, that is not the way we want to talk about it. But I thought that was interesting. 4 different people came across that and decided, hey, we should. I don't know if they were saying we should do it. I think they were just more thinking it was funny. Anyways, when we talk about giving, when we talk about finances, this whole thing, we've always been talking about the posture of our heart being the most important thing. And that is the thing that we discover in the way of Jesus, no matter what we are talking about, is that God is more concerned with the posture and the attitude of our heart and the direction we are moving. And our heart reveals our intent, our motives. And the same is true when it comes to money. So if you'll do me the favor, if you want, turn to Luke chapter 12. That's where we'll be hanging out. As you do, I want to give you a quick recap of what we've been covering. So week 1, we talked about the potential idol that money can be in our lives. And we've said, Jesus isn't after your money, he wants your heart. Week 2, we talked about the idea of generosity. We said, you aren't meant to be a reservoir for riches, but a conduit for the kingdom. It's not about just holding and building up more and more and more. It's about how you can be used in the mission of the kingdom. And then last week we talked about radical generosity isn't just about giving, it's about becoming. That as we let go and steward our resources and hand them out, there's a formation and change that happens in our life as we participate in the mission of the kingdom. And so today I want to spend a few minutes looking at Luke chapter 12, beginning at verse 13. Depending on your translation, it may read the parable of the rich fool. You may have a different title attached to it. But because we have a number of different elements as part of our gathering this morning, I'm going to go pretty quickly through a few things that stand out, and then we'll have a chance this week at Big Small Group on Tuesday night, which is an open invite to anyone who wants to come, 7 p.m., as we keep digging into these themes and these ideas. But Luke chapter 12. Also want to let you know that if you are new to Lewisville, we've been letting you know that next Sunday after the second service, we have a lunch for anyone who's new to the church and would love to have you be a part of that. If you've even been around here for quite a while, but you've never come to one of these and you're just interested in being a part of it, please do. You can sign up, email us, let us know you're coming so we can plan for the food, but that would be after the second service. So if this is your normal time, you might want to switch it up for next week and join us for that lunch. And then next week, just want to let you know where we're headed as we wrap up this Monday series. Next week, we are jumping into the Old Testament and doing a series on the monarchy, the origins of the monarchy within the nation of Israel, how it all got started, what does it mean, what do we learn from that? We haven't hung out in the Old Testament for an extended period, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to be tracing through this rise of the monarchy, the crown, as it comes into existence in the nation of Israel. So I'm excited to dig into that together. But here we go. Let's talk about Luke chapter 12 in this context. Jesus, as always, this passage is within a series of teachings Jesus is giving, and like he often does, he's calling out the hypocrisy of the religious leaders, talking about that they are fighting for power and position and control, and they're missing the heart of what they're supposed to be all about. And this is where we pick it up. Verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." A few things I want to just point out from this. I want to talk first about this idea that awareness is essential. So if you just look at verse 15 here, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. So the word watch out can be translated as beware or to stare out. So when you think about in this context, to stare out, to watch out, to beware, there's this idea that you have to engage not only with your eyes to see what is coming towards you, but also it involves you engaging with your mind to think and anticipate what's happening. That's the idea here, that it's not just this passive glancing out, but this engagement of your senses, your eyes, your watching, and your thinking to pay attention to what is approaching you, what is the potential harm that is out there. The idea of guarding or to keep watch, it's just noting that you have to pay attention to whatever is coming so that you can stay safe. That there's something that has the potential to get you off track, to distract you, to steal your heart, your affections, to snatch you away. And so you're supposed to watch out, to engage your eyes and your mind to kind of scan the horizon and note what is potential. And then note what you're supposed to watch out for, what you're supposed to be aware of against all kinds of greed. So as Jesus is saying this, he is giving this instruction, this warning about what is possible if we kind of take our eyes off the ball. If you fail to recognize the potential of greed to creep into your life, so much so that he's commanding you to watch out, to pay attention, to be on your guard. Greed then is this idea, the extreme desire for more and more. It's this pursuit that takes root in your life where what you have is never enough, and there's always a sense of, I'll be okay as long as I have a bit more. And it quickly can turn into jealousy and coveting, longing for the things that other people have. That's what happens when we allow greed to take root, is we begin this cycle of never feeling like we have enough, and then also noticing what other people have and wishing we were in their positions. And it leaves us in this state where we're just never satisfied. We're just never okay. There's always this longing for more, believing that if we can just get to the next thing, then everything will be okay. But it just kickstart all over again. So here Jesus is warning his followers, those who are listening to him in the moment, of the dangers and pitfalls that can come if you're not paying attention to greed, for it to take root. And so he uses this story now, this parable, to help illustrate this, making sure they are aware that this is an active role you have to play. You can't just sit back and just see what happens. There's this sense that you have to be an active participant to watch, to guard, to look out, to pay attention. And then he tells them this story. But I just want to read this one thing around outrageous generosity. I was reading an article from one of the kind of seminary professors I had in an adjunct way. His name's Greg Boyd, and he was talking about this idea of outrageous generosity in the life of the New Testament church and the potential pitfalls of greed. And this is what he says. He says, the fact is, there is an addictive quality to wealth that tends to, thank God for the wonderful exceptions, make wealthy people hoard their resources and be apathetic about the poor. And he goes on, he says, it's not that there is anything intrinsically evil with wealth or virtuous with poverty, but the danger of wealth is that one can easily begin to get life from it, while the one advantage of being poor is that one is more easily freed from this idol and is thus more open to receiving true life that comes from God. Many writers and commentators, when they're reflecting on the passages in Scripture that talk about money and wealth and the potential pitfalls and what stewardship looks like and what generosity look like, a common things that they often will talk about is that simplicity and generosity are the antidote to greed. So as greed has the potential to take over and infect your life, they would say simplicity, intentionally dialing your life back for the benefit of the other, and generosity is an expression of your allegiance to Jesus. Those are the antidotes to this potential virus of greed. And Jesus here is warning them about this. Now let's talk about this advisor idea. Who is your advisor? So when you need to make a major decision, whether it be financial, buying a house, buying a new thing, or maybe some other issue has popped up into your life, maybe it's a difficulty and you're trying to sort out, how do we manage this? How do we lead through this? Where do we turn? Or maybe let's not even just go negative. Maybe it's a great thing, like in this parable. Maybe you kind of stumble into an abundance of something or something great happens, a blessing. Who do you talk to as you're trying to figure out next steps? Our hope would be that we all have a close circle of trusted, safe people that we can process the good and the bad with so that they can help us figure things out. That is part of what the Christian life is calling us to, is the sense of community, of belonging to each other, so much so that even in major decisions we can turn to each other. See, if you want to look here at verse 17, 18, 19, if you have it open still, or we'll have it on the screen here. Here's the problem with this rich man, is he goes to the wrong advisor. Verse 17, he thought to himself. Verse 18, then he said, this is what I'll do. Verse 19, and I'll say to myself. See, the problem is when he's trying to make this major decision about this huge windfall, the crops he has planted, he's had this great harvest, like all this is coming in. And instead of trying to engage other people in his decision, what does he do? He goes to his internal self. He begins to just think that he is the lens with which to view the horizon and make the decision. He is the steward of the right path. He is the one to make the final call. And seemingly he doesn't involve anyone else. And so he says to himself, he thinks to himself, he decides what's best. And his version of what is right is to tear down what he has, to build bigger barns so he can accumulate more, store up more, and then notice what will happen. He'll be able then to say to himself, well, you deserve this now. Now you can sit back. Now it's eat, drink, and be merry. Look after yourself. You've earned this, right? Did he cause that crop to grow? Did he cause that abundance? Was that a blessing? Was it his doing? He puts himself in the advisor seat and never looks to engage. Seemingly, God is not a part of this equation at all. There's no thought of what does it mean to steward and to honor God. There's no thought of generosity, of looking out for other people, of being a conduit of blessing, of participating in kingdom mission with that with which we have been entrusted. It never seems to show up at all. A number of years ago, it made me think, there used to be these stickers that people put on their cars and stuff. I don't know how it got started exactly, but the stickers said something like, he who dies with the most toys wins. I don't know if you've ever seen, I always thought, what kind of person puts that on their car? It's a really interesting choice, you know? We would see those around. There's t-shirts, there's things. This is going back quite a ways, but he who dies with the most toys win. This idea that to win means the accumulation of stuff, having more than everyone else, gaining the attention of everyone else. And is that victory? Is that success? Is that winning? And then there was this company called No Fear. They made t-shirts and stuff, and they had these t-shirts, who dies with the most toys still dies. I don't know if they were directly combating each other or trying to go at it, but it was all around the same time. And that's the simple truth that Jesus is talking about. You can store up as much as you want. You can have your own idea of what success and arriving looks like. You can tear down your barns and build bigger barns. You can sit back and think, I deserve this. I can eat, drink, and be merry. But at the end of the day, when we all die, we take none of it with us. And Jesus is using it, this idea, this pursuit, as a stern warning to his followers about the potential that can grab a hold of us and hold a hold of our affection. Craig Keener in his commentary says, this parable illustrates the danger of placing trust in material wealth, neglecting the imperatives of generosity and dependence on God. See, every time we talk about this heart posture thing when it comes to money and finances and allegiance to God, it always comes back to the heart posture. Do we believe that we in and of ourselves are okay, that we can handle it, that we can manage it, we deserve it, it's about us, we become inward, our decisions, do they reveal this self-centeredness about us? Or is this softening, this allegiance, this alignment with the way of Jesus, with the practices of the kingdom that show us that these things don't control us, they don't become our idol, our God? And there is the potential, there's a stern warning for all of us to pay attention to this. We have admitted off the top of this series that sometimes these conversations are difficult for us to have. It feels deeply personal. Don't ask me about my things or how I steward, or it's kind of like this zone where you shouldn't touch. And I'm not saying we should all get into everyone's business, but we should have some people who help us as we're navigating and talking and can ask us hard questions. If someone were to say to you, a good friend were to say to you, how are you doing stewarding that which has been entrusted to you by Jesus? And you get really, really uncomfortable and think, how dare they, and you get defensive, I wonder if you should step back and say, why do I feel so defensive about a question if it's coming in the right way from the person that obviously cares about me and I trust? What is that revealing then? Is that the thing that we just can't talk about? Can we just not talk about how money can creep into our lives or even celebrate the way we're blessed and using our finances to participate in what we sense God inviting us into? Are we not able to share those stories or those challenges with each other? See, the kingdom worldview is, how do you see the world? How do you view that which has been entrusted to you? How do you think about those things? How do you process those things? Who do you talk to about those things? In the hierarchy of pursuits and investments and what we put our time and focus and attention on, our relationship with God must be above our pursuit of material wealth. I kind of sketch it out this way. If we're thinking about the kingdom worldview, about belonging to the kingdom that Jesus has started, in this conversation at least, I kind of think about it this way. At some point, we all need to decide if we're giving our hearts and allegiance to Jesus. Do we recognize Jesus as king? It starts there. Then do we acknowledge somewhere along the way that everything we have is from God? God is the source of all of our blessings. And are we willing to recognize that? And in that, do we allow God to transform our thinking and our actions by reshaping our affections and our identity? Rather than finding our sense of value and identity in material things or value or what other people think of us, maybe cultural wins, do we begin to shift and see our identity and our sense of belonging, about belonging to who God has called us to be, belonging to Jesus? And then we commit to the ongoing work of surrender, of this transformation that comes as the Holy Spirit is working in our life. And then do we begin to look at the things that have been entrusted to us, the things that God gives us, and do we begin to think, how are we stewarding these wisely, whether it be little or a lot? How are we using these things? And we've talked about before, the things that we're given to steward. We are focusing on money in this series, but it's all kinds of things. It's gifts, it's talents, it's skills, it's time, it's relationships, and it's money. Don't skip by that one. And it's our resources, our finances. So how do we steward those wisely? Are our lives being marked by generosity? If someone were to look into it, are we trying our best? Is our heart to move in that direction, like we talked about yesterday, moving towards the posture of generosity, the action of generosity? Do we see ourselves then as kingdom citizens, participating in what Jesus has begun and asking us to join him in what he's continuing to roll out, the expansion of his kingdom? Do we see ourselves as part of that, and we willingly then joyfully invest all of who we are in seeing the kingdom of Jesus realized here and now? along the way pointing people to Jesus so that while they may see our actions and say, wow, that's a generous person, they ultimately realize, oh, the animation that flows through that person that gets them to move in that direction is because they serve and follow Jesus. That's this kingdom worldview, this kingdom shape that begins to take place in our life. So one of the things in this series, as we've been having lots of good conversations, I've been hearing from a number of people, like I said. I've heard about couples starting to engage more openly, talking about their finances and how they're sharing and figuring those things out together, trying to normalize having those and not making them stressful. That's awesome. I've heard from parents who are discussing these kinds of concepts and ideas in age-appropriate way with their kids, modeling and talking about it so that it feels more normal as their kids are developing and growing. I've heard from people who are talking across different kind of generational lines, family lines, different kind of nuclear family circles, all now talking about it together. People brainstorming, small groups, praying and trying to be creative of what can we do, what is God inviting us to do. Yes, we're part of Lewisville as a church, but is there something that we as a group need to also then pay attention to? I've heard about friends who are inviting colleagues and coworkers and neighbors to join them in what they're doing because people want to make a difference in our city. They may not point that to Jesus at this point, but there's something infectious about wanting to meet a need and be generous. And people have shared stories like that with me, which is amazing. Intentional conversations, awareness, renewed thinking. How does this all impact our discipleship? It would seem to me like this has been a really important and timely conversation for us to have as a church and in our discipleship journey. So thank you for sharing some of those things. I want to give you an update because 2 weeks ago we did a reverse offering. If you weren't here, here's the gist of it. We took $600 and we put it in different denominations. We put it in envelopes and we taped it up under different seats in the room. And then at the end of the service, we invited you to look under your seat. And some people pulled out 20, some people pulled out a 50, some people pulled out 100. And I want to give you an update on what's happened with that. I thought it was learning from some friends who've done it before. I thought that would be kind of a creative exercise for us to know and be entrusted. You are stewarding now these resources on behalf of the church, and you're going to have to report back on it. So a little bit of a healthy kind of challenge, pressure, but what does that look like for you? And I'm not going to be able to cover all the stories and everything that's happened, but I want to give you kind of a taste of what's happened across the board, because it's been quite fascinating. I know I'm getting older, and as I get older, some of my emotions are a bit closer to the surface. People in my age bracket will relate, but tears seem to more easily well up on the sides of my eyes. But there were certainly some stories as I was reading them where I felt super emotional about the privilege we have together to pay attention to the need in our city and meet some of those needs. Like, that is a humbling and encouraging thing for us. It should be. It's what a joy, what a privilege, what an opportunity. So one family reported with the money they found that they weren't planning on this, but they unexpectedly found themselves in the ER with a sick child one night. And as they spent, not to comment on our health system, but as they spent a long period of time waiting for attention and were finally released, they said that first they were kind of frustrated by this, and they kind of softened and they decided, hey, I actually want to do something for those workers who are caring and doing the best they can in tough situations. And so they purchased some snacks and treats, and they went back then to the hospital and just said, we want to thank you for the attention you give us and how you're standing in the gap. And I think what an amazing way of just acknowledging something, in the moment. We had other people who are kind of care about different organizations in our city. So Harvest House, for instance, where they reached out and find out what are the items of greatest need that you have, and then they tried to do their best to make the money stretch and bring them exactly what they needed, and had great conversations with staff members, letting them know why they were doing this and what got this conversation started, which is also a little ripple that spreads through other people as they hear about it. We had one person or a couple people share that they have this heart for those who are trying to beat addiction. And when they reached out to an organization doing those things, they realized that they have this huge need for bedding. And so they thought, we are going to do our best to make the money stretch by going thrift shopping and trying to find good quality things, but make the money stretch. And when they got to the place, they realized the day they went shopping was a 30% seniors discount day. So the money went a little bit further, which is awesome. And they were able to get 5 complete sets of sheets, 5 blankets, and had enough money left over to jump over to Walmart and buy 5 new pillowcases, brand new pillowcases. And so they were able to give these sets then to this ministry working with people trying to beat addiction. Amazing. We had another family feel like this idea of supporting their local food bank. And so they found out the need, which was for canned protein, and they went to the store and they bought the best stuff they could and bought as much as they could. And when they delivered it, the comment from the organization is like, "Oh, you brought us the good stuff," which is amazing. We also had multiple stories come back in where the initial investment that was entrusted to someone, we saw like this momentum grow around it, where the money, the initial investment grew so that they could try to do more with it as more people heard about it. So let me give you a few of those examples. One pair of friends found $20 under their seats, and after lots of good conversations and planning and praying about it, they started inviting other people to be a part of the experiment, and that 20 turned into $350 of cash as people were donating back into it, plus a box of additional supplies for babies and moms that they dropped off at the Pregnancy and Wellness Center. So $20 became $350 plus extra supply. It's amazing, right? People not a part of our church, hearing about the need and the opportunity, thinking it's kind of creative or fun, decided to jump in. We had another person who found $20, but they came to us right away after the service and said they were about to leave and be out of town. And so they added $100 to it, and they gave it back to us and said, "Well, we're going to give it back to Lewisville for the work you do." But I'm like, no, we got to give it back out. So now that 20 is now 120. We handed it out to a small group for the work and asked them, "Would you consider stewarding this?" And so they began to pray and talk about it and brainstorm. And so their plan then, out of that initial $20 that became 120, is now over 350 and counting, and they are supporting women's shelter with health kits, hygiene, underwear, some chocolate, and notes of encouragement. You just see these ripples that are going up as people are catching these ideas and getting excited. It's interesting what happens when you're saying, "Would you steward this amount and then tell us what you're doing?" The sense of excitement and momentum that's building. We also found one where this is kind of a fun little experiment that's happened, is that one family found $50, and then I think we still had one envelope that had not yet been claimed, so they sent their son to start crawling out underneath all the chairs, and he found the last one. So they had $70, and then a few other friends gave them a bit more. So together they had $85, and they began to buy some winter hats, mitts, and gloves. And then other people heard about it and donated other good quality winter gear and things like that. And through a relationship they have, a family relationship, that stuff is all now on the way to a family member who works in northern Quebec that works with an indigenous community there to support them in what they're doing. So this little moment we have now is like rippling out into northern Quebec. Again, these aren't massive things, right? We're not talking about $100,000. We're not talking about $1 million. We're talking about $20 that becomes $50 that people steward. They get creative. They see a need. They want to be a part of it. But these are the things that transform and change us. These are the things that are part of our discipleship and awareness that opens up. I had asked Elaine to put the envelopes around because I didn't want to know. Most people I kind of know generally where you sit. Like I could probably tell some people right now, you're sitting in weird seats this morning. It's really throwing me off. But most people, and I didn't want to know, and so Elaine taped them up and so I never intended to, but our family got an envelope. But as Bobby was kind of stewarding that with our kids, they thought they were going to add a little bit more to it and buy a whole bunch of wool. And then our daughter, Tabea, is on this real knitting kick. And so she's now made 21 hats, wool hats, 7 large, 7 for kids, and 7 baby size. And so our hope then is to sell those hats, and then now that money that's grown because it's turned through some sweat equity, turned into a greater amount, can then be given to an organization that's helping with addiction and homelessness. And so cheap plug, but the hats are now for sale at the back of the room. Please use them. We do not need 21 hats at our house. Okay? If you want to, they're at the back. You can check those out today. I asked the participants if they could share with us a little bit about what they learned in this process. So overwhelmingly, a lot of people said they initially felt stressed and anxious about how to best use it and to steward, and how are they going to write back, and how do we share, how are we going to do all this? But in the end, they realized a couple things. It's always good to ask others for ideas and brainstorm together, kind of talk with their advisors. It was fun for them to learn how to try to make things stretch. How do I take this amount even if it's small, and try to see how far we can go with it. That's a good practice for us always, right? They spent time thinking and praying, checking out needs, considering opening their eyes to what the needs in our city are, opportunities for partnership. They found generosity often leads to other generosity, that those who aren't even a part or attached to our church, but maybe relationally connected through a neighborhood or a workplace, were more than willing to jump in and help meet a need. Amazing. That there's this learning that in all ways we need to then consider how are we stewarding our lives, our generosity, the things that God has entrusted to us. It's this reminder for many of we need to look at this again and think about this and consider this. How does this impact our discipleship and our allegiance to Jesus? So thank you for those of you who participated, who took it so seriously. Thanks for all the stories. I couldn't get to them all, but thank you for all the stories that came in. It was such a fun experiment and great lessons learned, and thank you for just taking that to heart and doing such a great job with it. One of the things I wanted to do, as I mentioned off the top, is I wanted to have some folks participate with us and share from their own stories what their journey with money and finances has been like. And so you never know when you're going to ask people, especially on this topic, how they might feel about it, but I'm so thankful that all these folks agreed. So Stephanie McDonald is going to be first. So Stephanie, you can come on up. So Stephanie is going to share first, and then Matt and Bethany Robertson are going to come right after that, and then Sharon Vickruck is going to come up right after that. So it'll be back to back to back, 3 different stories. And I just said, hey, you can talk about kind of a big picture thing of how you've learned about finances and stewardship and generosity and money in your own walk with Jesus, or you could tie into one of the themes we've been exploring as a church, but just open freedom for them to share a little bit. So I'm really grateful that they're willing to just be honest and transparent and vulnerable and put some flesh, some real life stories out to our church community about what God is doing in and through these conversations. It might be easiest, Stephanie, if you stand to the side a bit here.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Over to you.
Hello. Can you hear me? I don't feel like you can. Okay, now you can. Hi, I'm Stephanie. I grew up in the church, and I often watched my parents give generously in church. But then in our home life, we had enough money. I never felt like I got those luxuries that I saw my friends with. I never went without, but I never felt like I had that extra. So when I was 14, I begged my parents to let me get a job, and they were pretty willing to let me do it. And then I started right away to earn money to get those things that I thought I wanted and needed, like a cell phone, my own car, saving up for post-secondary, and the fun things that go along with that. So I went to college and got my first career job at 19, and I became quickly obsessed with my paycheck. It was a beautiful thing for me. I met with a financial advisor and had a plan to retire by the time I was 45 and was pretty excited about that. I have a type A personality, and so having that control and planning out all my steps is something I find so exciting. But it also really impacted how I interacted with others. I am very number conscious, and I asked my friends to help me come up with an example of a way that I was extremely money conscious. That was a bad idea because I ended up getting roasted for 10 minutes and I didn't get to say it all. They're all really embarrassing, so I'm not going to share them. But I had really, really gracious friends. So I continued to grow in my career, and by the time I was 22, I was working 60 to 70 hours a week in a job I really hated in hopes of a promotion to another job that I also knew I was going to hate, so that I could get a bigger paycheck. It became this thing that I just kept chasing over everything. I gave up a lot of my free time and would not go out with friends just because I was like, if I work this Friday night, I'm more likely to get promoted. And I was really starting to hate my life. I felt like a golden handcuff to my job. I didn't like it, but it paid really well, so I just kept doing it. And at that point, I had started to tithe a little bit. I think it was about 1% of my salary, and I held it I was like, I don't want to give this up, but then here I am, okay, I guess I got to, that's what I was told to do when I grew up in church. But then right around this time when I was 22, several of my close friends moved away, and I realized that I was pretty miserable with how my life was going. My work was really unsatisfying. And so my friend's church was organizing a mission trip, and I felt called to pray for them, so I reached out to the leader and said, hey, how can I pray for you? And he's like, come to this meeting. And I was like, oh, you're going to suck me into this mission trip and I don't want to go. So I went to the meeting with no intention to go on that trip. At the end of the meeting, he looked at me and he said, are you coming? And I was like, I made a bet with God right then. And I said, no, God, I'm not going. But I have this motorcycle fund. And so it's not very much. So if the mission trip's going to 100% cost more than that. But if it costs that much, I guess I'll go. It cost exactly the amount of money I put aside. So I went. On this trip, it did not go as planned. We ended up going to a completely different country. And I saw the work that these people were doing. We went to a drop-in center in a slum, and we were watching these people work day in and day out with these kids. And they were pretty open about their finances, and I saw the cost of living, and I saw the amount that they were making, and I was like, why would you pick this job? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And they're like, well, we're not really doing it for the paycheck. And I was like, why wouldn't you do this for the paycheck? So when I got home, I did a lot more soul searching and tried to figure out, like, okay, if those people can do that, how come I can't? So I continued to ask God to open my heart to what he wanted me to do, except I didn't want to go down in how much I was going to make in my money. That didn't last very long, and I quickly realized that in order for me to follow him fully, I would have to give up my salary so that he could work with me and do the work that he had planned for me that aligned my talents and abilities with what he wanted me to do. So I had just gotten a new job at that point. I'd been there for like 4 months, and I quit my job and went back to Crandall to become a teacher. So finishing my undergraduate and then becoming a teacher after that. And it's like pretty scary because for the first time in my life, I was seeing my bank account like decline, and I was like, oh no, this is like really stressful. But I was like, I think this is what God wants me to do, so I just continued to do it. And I saw that God started to provide for me in small ways. I got a part-time job pretty quickly that was definitely he aligned that for me and things like that. And it was actually at a youth event that I was serving with. We were at Encounter in Sussex. And I was talking to Shiloh Hughes, and he was like, yeah, God's done all these things. He's provided for me in these ways. And he has these crazy stories. And I was like, you're nuts to trust God in that way. Like, that's insane. But then I kept thinking, like, okay, I probably should trust him in that way too. So I started praying and asking God to reveal to me how to trust him in that way. And it was a gradual process, but I continued to turn over more and more aspects of my life and try to hold my hands open with what he had stewarded with me. And as I asked him to let me trust him more, I began to see him working in my life more. For example, last year for school, I went on a mission trip again, and I had to raise a certain amount of money, and I went fundraising, and I was like, all right, I got this. And at the end of all my fundraising and the amount of money in my bank account, I was short money. And so I went to CBM, and I was like, hey, like, I don't have the money. Like, I'll pay it back when I start working, but I can't do it. And they're like, why do you have to pay us back? Your account has been paid in full. And I was like, that wasn't me. I don't know who did that. So that was pretty cool. And yeah, so I've never been as broke as I have been right now, but I have so much more freedom in Christ. And I'm trying really hard to allow my funds to not be my own, but just something that I'm managing on behalf of Christ. For someone that has had a retirement plan since I started working, it's really hard for me sometimes to say, like, okay, it's not my life, but yours to work through me. And now I'm trying to treat my money as a spiritual discipline. Just like I pray and read my Bible, I'm also tracking how God has used my finances and tracking how he has provided for me in many different situations. And I find that it has been really encouraging. I still get a lot of anxiety about it, but it's been this ongoing process, a really beautiful thing that he has been working in my life. Yeah, and so that's my story. I'm still working on it, but I feel like there's a lot more freedom in Christ, so a lot more freedom in my life, not knowing that I'm going to have money, but just because I know that he is in control. That's it.
Thanks for sharing, Stephanie. And it's really interesting because I know what I'm about to say. And then when I hear other people's stories and the words that Matt has already shared with us, it's so cool to see how God is already intertwining some of our stories. So just keep that in mind as you listen to the next few people. If we have not already met, We are the Robertsons. I am Bethany, and this is Matt. And we are coming up on 12 years of growing our relationship and our faith as a couple. In the first week of this series, we did a questionnaire to see how we felt towards money. I wasn't surprised to see that I valued security. Now, I tend to read the scriptures through a mental health lens. So when it comes to sharing what I've been learning throughout the series, a lot of my reflections have been in the area of anxiety. Why? Why do I value financial security? What are my unnamed or repressed fears? What experiences, insecurities, successes, and failures in my life contribute to my desire to feel secure with my bank account? I've never questioned tithing to the church. However, I can identify several occasions where the desire to feel secure has stirred up friction in my marriage, especially when the ask or opportunity to give above and beyond 10% is presented. I acknowledge these developing anxious attitudes towards giving. Thankfully, God is good. He understands anxiety because he saw and walked so many through it. He speaks healing over our worries and gives us examples of his endless goodness and provision in his teachings. God has been growing me in becoming a more cheerful giver, and he has reminded me about the body of Christ and how it has many parts. I thank God that my husband and I have different strengths. And if any of you have ever played the game Boggle, just a little story. When we play, none of our words are the same. So that is saying something when it comes to how our brains function and where our skills lie. And God uses our differences to strengthen our partnership. This teaching series has reminded me of the ways God grows a marriage when we lean on one another's skills, the body of Christ. If we're willing to unpack our whys from that questionnaire in week 1, we can experience the joy that comes with being good stewards.
I'm just checking emails up here. So generally speaking in my life, I said this earlier to somebody, I'm not particularly introspective in how I go about things. I like to live in what we're doing right now and kind of focus on the people that are in front of me right now. But when people ask questions like was asked to us this week, it sort of forces us to do that, so maybe a healthy thing. This kind of question leads me to be really happy about my upbringing. And I'm very thankful because of a very significant figure in my life. I've had a reasonably healthy relationship to money for most of it. My dad ran a small business for 25 years, and we didn't always have a lot, especially early on. He was out there working and hustling and probably has been in a number of your houses over the last 40 years, crawling under your washer or dryer or into your stove or whatever. So we didn't always have a lot, but God always provided. And he always tried really hard to teach me the value of money, which I didn't always follow through with. Shout out to 2012, the first pair of Jordans I ever bought that just never got worn. However, the lessons that he taught did really kind of become pervasive throughout the course of my life, and especially my marriage as well. So 2 really quick things that he instilled in me. And the first was how important it was to give and give generously. Even when we didn't have a lot. So I remember very specific memories of kids of every Sunday getting handed the envelope and being the one to put that in the offering plate, even though that wasn't my money to give. But that did translate into me getting my first job in high school, initially being forced to give away 10% of my $5.75 an hour, like real big roller. But as time went on, it did become part of my relationship with money and part of my inherent responsibility of what God has given us. So I think God honored that. And because especially when we got married, we didn't have a whole lot of money, and the bills always got paid. And looking back, I have much better spreadsheets now, but at the time, the incoming and outgoing didn't always make sense, but it always worked. And, obviously that's a God provision thing. I don't want to go back and reanalyze, but I'm very thankful. The second thing that he was incredibly great at instilling in me is an interest in learning about finance and exploring that entire realm. He taught me how important it was to save and to plan for the future, because as I'm sure many of your parents and many of you have said, like, I'm not going to have a pension like one of those federal workers or whatever that thing is. But that was something he instilled early on, was that we do have to save and be good stewards of our money for our future as well. When I left home, he gave me The Wealthy Barber, sort of intro to personal finance, kind of a classic, and encouraged me to read about the markets and all the surrounding factors and everything else. We always talked about baseball and business news, and at the end of the road, that kind of led to a passion and ultimately a career in finance. My important note to all of you, and why I tell that story, is because obviously stewardship with our money and be good with our finances is important, but just as important is to be a good steward of the knowledge we've been given. So my note to you is, please teach your kids about money, whether that's like credit cards or mortgages or saving or compound interest or whatever it is. Please instill that in your kids, because creating a next generation of self-sufficient people is so, so important. So many people I talked to had to dig themselves out of a hole that they dug for themselves in their late teens and early 20s because they just didn't have that knowledge and that thing. So if you have that knowledge, please spend time and teach it to your kids. If you don't, maybe a bit of a light switch to be like, okay, maybe I need to go get a little more educated so that I can teach my kids to be good stewards. It's sort of how you can leave a legacy. And I have a very wise friend who often asks me, what do you value? And that question really ignites a thought about my priorities and what do I value. And for me, in raising our kid, our son, like, this is a really important thing. So give generously and teach your kids about money, and that's the context of my moment. So thank you.
Good morning. My husband, Vern, was going to be doing this with me. You'll just have to pretend that he's here. He got called out of town on business, so we prepared together, and I'll present it for both of us. As a child, I was taught by my parents the biblical principle of stewardship. They modeled it both in their generosity, in helping people, and in tithing. As a teenager, Vern also learned about stewardship, so when we got married, we both brought that idea of tithing with us into our relationship. Over the years, have we ever failed at it? Absolutely. It's been a work in progress, and I must say along the way, there have been more than one heated discussion centered on money. Many years ago, we promised each other that we would never talk about money in our bedroom at night. That never went well before we decided that. And that's a promise we've kept to each other for about 35 years. We started as married students, worked in a para-church organization. Then Vern went to seminary, so we were students again. Then he became a youth pastor. During those years, there never was much money, certainly never any extra. And often, I can relate to what Matt said, often on paper, there was no way we were going to make it to the end of the month. But every time we did. We started to see more and more that God was taking care of us, that as we gave back to him first, he supplied our needs. Just like it says in Philippians 4:19, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. I once told a children's story in our previous church during a stewardship series. I started with 10 apples, and I set aside 9 for living expenses, counted them out for living and so on for the kids, and I chose a beautiful red one to give to God. But as I talked, that apple looked so good that I started taking bites. And by the time I had finished my story, I only had the core left to give to God. He deserves the whole apple, not the core. And Vern and I have tried to live that way. We admit that early on in our marriage, it was difficult to not be resentful when we were serving God, serving others, tithing, and struggling financially, while it seemed our friends just had so much more. But we realized our focus was totally wrong and we needed a big course correction. We started looking with gratitude at how God was shaping us when, in times of need, we really needed to rely on Him and trust Him for every day. And through the years, those have been the sweetest times. I can say that now. At the time, it didn't seem that way, but it certainly seems that way now, that those have been the sweetest times right up to the present. One story we love to recall, of many stories that we have of God's provision, is when we were raising our own support. And many months, there wasn't enough support coming in. Some of you have heard the story before, but it bears repeating. We were short one month $170 for our mortgage payment, and it was due in 2 days. And we prayed about it, but we never told anybody of our need other than God. A friend arrived for a visit at the door and said she had felt God telling her to write us a check for a very specific amount. She didn't know why. When we looked at it, the amount was $170. And you can tell that still story is just like it happened yesterday to me. God is amazing, and she had listened to Him, and that grew our faith, all of our faith together. Another time, a number of years ago, we needed money for new tires, desperately needed new tires on our vehicle, but there was no extra money. An envelope appeared anonymously at our door containing several $100s, just what we needed. God again provided our need through the generosity of His people. So over the many years, how has our idea of giving and of tithing changed? We would sum it up like this. As newlyweds, we started tithing our 10% out of obligation. Now, we give as much as we can, and we give it with joy. For us, that's a big change. We believe that supporting our local church is the first place that our tithes should go. And every time we've wanted to increase the amount we give or want to add a new opportunity to those we already support, God has provided a way, either by an increase in income, a way to decrease expenses, an unexpected gift, or sometimes an unusually large income tax refund. We've experienced Acts 20:35, Jesus' words when He says, "It is more blessed to give than it is to receive." I'm not sure that in the early days of our marriage we believed that, but now we sure do. And we can actually say it's fun to be generous. We definitely see money and how we steward it as a huge part of following Jesus. I know that our understanding has grown so much in the 44 years that we've been married. And it has been both a challenge and a blessing. We both have much more to learn, but as we rely on God, we must say that we're both excited to see how our faithful God will lead us forward. Thanks.
To end our time here, we're going to sing, and I want to invite you to come to the figurative communion table this morning, recognizing our act of worship and thanksgiving and remembering the one who has given it all for us, who emptied Himself fully of everything. So the communion service, if you're here and in the room, if you want to come forward. And as we sing to close, I want to invite you just to come with a posture of gratefulness, of thankfulness, of recognizing our identity in Jesus. And I want to use this reading to set us up here. and then I'll turn it over to the Jeff and team. We come to this table because Jesus invites us, not because we're perfect, not because we've got it all figured out, but because of love. Real, self-giving, self-centered, other-centered love. That's what calls us here today. Jesus is the one who shows us what real love looks like. Love that bends down to wash dusty feet. Love that feeds the hungry and welcomes the outsider. Love that doesn't cling to power but pours itself out freely and generously. This table reminds us of that love. It reminds us that Jesus held nothing back, not even his own life. He gave everything so we could be free, so we could be whole, so we can know just how deeply we are loved. And in response to this, we come with gratitude, not just polite, whispered thank yous, but the kind of gratitude that changes us, the kind that humbles us, that reorients our hearts and makes us want to live differently. Because if Jesus has given everything, then that's what we should do too, isn't it? Our time, our gifts, our resources, our very breath. They're not just ours to hold tightly. They're meant to be shared, used, poured out in love for others, just as he has done for us. So as we take this bread and this cup, let it be an act of surrender, a moment where we choose again to trust, to love, to give. May this simple expression of a meal shape us into the people who, like Jesus, love and live with open hands. People who choose generosity over greed, humility over pride, others over ourselves. Jesus has set the table. He invites us to come, not just to receive, but to be changed. So come, eat, drink, and remember, and let his love flow through you. Amen.